Hey folks, so I saw that one of my videos was found because people were searching for Unity game development tutorial. So people are just looking for like tutorials and stuff or whatever the case. I thought that I would just give a little bit of some information on what I know about Unity. To give it a little bit of context, I have been doing this for a couple months since the 20th of February, I think it was. So February to March, March to April, 20. So it's been 8, 9 weeks, 9.5 weeks. Okay, I've been able to accomplish quite a bit. Obviously, this isn't it. I've got some games up on like Itchy and stuff like that. So let's just show you that. Um, so I've got this Rogue Venture game, and so it's got like a little load screen, and then you got your little guy, and he's got a machine gun. You can shoot and so on and so forth. And there's spikes and little traps and different types of enemies and boxes that break, and there's health pickups and stuff like this. And you have to clear a room before the doors open, so it's a roguelite. And you travel around and you pick up money. And do I have one with the shop? No, I don't. I was looking for a picture with the shop, and there's a shop so that you can spend the gold and get higher max HP or heal yourself and things like this. And this was done through a tutorial that I have on Udemy, right? Um, so there was that, and I've done some other things, some dungeon generation and things like that. And I just wanted to give you kind of an idea if you're at the very beginning of all this. Like I've done that in 2 months. And it's not that bad, you know. You should definitely be following some tutorials because it's the quickest way to learn. But I'm going to tell you some things that I understand so that you can have a little bit of a perspective here on what Unity can do and what it looks like and things like that. So this might look a little bit different than like what you've got, but on the left hand side, these are all your game objects. This is the best way for me to understand this, and this is what I think is kind of like most important to understand, that your hierarchy, this is all your game objects. And each of these little game objects, I'm going to take it out of play mode. Each of these little game objects that you have, so I've got one here, and if I create another one that's empty, the game object is here, but there's no sprite, there's nothing there. It's just kind of like a reference. It's just saying, hey, there's a thing here, but we don't know what it does, how it does it. We don't know what it looks like until we start putting other components on it. These components are on the right hand side here. Okay, so this game object, which I've named Wizard, all right, has a sprite renderer component. It has a movement controller script component, and it has a rigid body component. And the best way for me to understand this and kind of explain is that each of these things is like a class, like a script that does stuff, and it provides information and it takes in information and so on and so forth, right? So the sprite renderer is built by Unity, and you can add it by just going in here and putting a sprite renderer. Okay, and there's information that is all being managed and controlled, and you can switch this information here in the inspector, but you don't have access to the code or anything, right? Now you do through the API. So if you were to go in here and type like sprite renderer, for example, sprite renderer, we'll just click whatever. So the sprite renderer has all of this information, all these properties and inherited things and methods and all this stuff that you can do and use and so on and so forth. And you'll see here, like this, for example, the property flip X, okay, which flips the sprite on the X axis. If we go back over to Unity, we can see that the sprite renderer has flip X available here, which it does do something. Let me take a look at my Bonum. It does do something, and it's in the inspector, okay? But you have access to other things inside the sprite renderer through scripts. And so I've created one here called a movement controller, okay? And this movement controller has code that I've put in here, and And one of the things that I wanted to affect was the rigid body, because the rigid body component, if you read up on it on the API and things like that, and you learn how to interact with it and how to use it, it has things like gravity. So you can change the gravity of an object here in the inspector, but you can do it through code too, of course, right? But there's other things that you can affect that you can't see here, that you wouldn't really want the option to be here because it wouldn't make sense, like the velocity of an object, especially if it were based on input. So the rigid body, which applies physics to this game object, okay, can be edited and used through scripts. And what I've done to do this is I've gone into my script and I've said, hey, we're going to make a variable here using a rigid body 2D that we're going to call RB. And then based on some stuff that happens, all right, we're going to affect the velocity, and we're going to make the rigid body's velocity equal to the movement input times the movement speed. And that basically just means that when I push keys, then my little banana goes like this. Boop. And you can run around and do stuff, right? Now, what's kind of interesting, I find about programming and using Unity is that once you get through a whole bunch of tutorials, okay, like I said, I went to Udemy, I bought maybe $100 worth of tutorials, and I'm learning how to do all this stuff through those, and you start to understand, the basics of C# and how to use it and things like this, and then you can see what you're doing in Unity, which makes it easier to learn. So just as like a C# learning tool, I would use Unity, you know what I mean? At the same time, I get to do cool things and make what I'm calling a game, right? So, what did I want to say? Yeah, so to affect the, flip, or to affect the gravity or the velocity, what you're doing is you're just gonna go down in the nest of the code. So rigid body dot velocity. So velocity is nested into rigid body, and the local scale is nested inside of transform. And I don't have any of the flip X stuff, for example, but I could be doing that too. So the sprite renderer, which I've named SR, okay, we could say sprite renderer, so SR dot, and then you'll see all the things that you can have access to. So in this case, we would want to have access to the flip X. So sprite renderer dot flip X. So it's kind of neat because you can just kind of you can grab the pieces that you want, you can do things to them. So you can say, the flip X is going to equal, and then in this case it happens to be a Boolean. So it's a thing that's either true or false. It's either yes or it's a no. In this case, flip X, is it checked? Okay, fine, it's going to be checked. Or I can say, no, it's not going to be checked, and I'm going to say false. I don't want that in my code right now there, but so when it comes to game development, I mean, I think this is kind of like some of the super basic stuff. You have these game objects that you create, and then you can add components to them. So in this case, this game object only has a transform component, which means, a position in space. So it's here, or it's here, it's here, it's here. If I rotate it with the editing tools, the editor, right? If I rotate it, you're going to see that it rotates, right? So, oops. Let's go just take a look at the Z here, right? If I rotate it, it's rotating. If I make this game object bigger and I stretch it out, there's nothing to see, but I've technically stretched it. You just can't see anything, but you can see that the scale is increasing, right? Now, if I was to add a component like a sprite renderer and then choose a sprite, and let's say that I chose the staff, see the staff, how it's all stretched out? That's because I've made all those changes. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to reset that transform, right? And oh geez, what am I doing here? This is my staff, and so I can go into the code, obviously not the movement controller, but one that I would apply to the staff that I would add here and call this like staff code or whatever, and then I would put code into it, and I could take this and I could flip the X, for example. But I can also do it here, in the inspector. And so yeah, you add different components together and different scripts and so on and so forth, and eventually what you end up having is a little wizard guy, and he can run around just like so. There we go. Oh. You can't bump into it because neither of them occupy any like physical space. They don't have any colliders. But that's something else that I could do. Let's show you that real quick, right? So we'll add a, what kind of collider would I put on this guy? Let's say like a box collider, okay? And the collider is this green spot. And let's go over to the rows, and let's add a box collider on this guy. And so let's hit play. So they both have something that they can detect collision. And see, now I'm bumping against the rows. I'm spinning, however, because that's a part of some physics that was, written into the rigid body, right? But one of the options that I have here is to freeze the rotation, freeze the Z position. And so now I won't rotate. I'll just kind of like push around. Whoa. I'll just kind of like push around the rows. And anyways, yeah, so there's a whole bunch of things that you can do and so on and so forth. And that would be the beginning. So you could imagine in not too long, you could have a little guy that runs and jumps onto things. And then maybe you have your mouse and you can, maybe this would be a bullet and you can click it and it would instantiate, which means to create or like to place a game object here. So you would have one that's prefabricated in your project called bullet, and every time you would click, it would place a bullet, and that bullet would move. So you could jump and you could shoot, and things like that. And then you can have a little run and gun 2D side-scrolling shooter thing. So there you go. That's Unity game development discussion 101, I guess.